I've heard a lot of talk lately about the president invoking the Insurrection Act and martial law. In an effort to keep us focused on facts, I thought it would be a good idea to review the Insurrection Act, see what powers are legally delegated to the United States, and hopefully dispel some rumors you might have heard. So we'll do that next on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study with my next to last video in 2020. It's been quite a year. Whether it's been good for you, bad for you, or just plain enough to pull your hair out, we're almost done with 2020. And except for a little New Year's celebration, this is my last episode, and I hope you'll be joining me in 2021 for more useful, constitutional, original documents, information, and education. I have some news coming up for 2021. I'm working hard to get some new products available, enhancements to the Constitution Scholars, a new subscription program you might be interested in. So please stay in touch. Follow me at the website, constitutionstudy.com. Even better, sign up for the newsletter. Even the newsletter is looking to get a facelift. So it's going to be a very interesting 2021. If you sign up for the newsletter, you'll be some of the first people to know when I release these new products, when I release these new updates, and to get first dibs on any discounts and offers I may be making. So please do that. constitutionstudy.com/newsletter, and you can sign up for free. I don't spam you. I send out about one newsletter a month, and unless there's something really important going on, that's about it. I don't want to fill up your inbox. I know how frustrating it is when I get tons of emails. So please give that a try. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of this episode. But for now, let's talk about the Insurrection Act. If we're going to talk about insurrection, we had better define it first, right? Well, from Webster's 1828 dictionary, we read, quote, a rising against civil or political authority, the open and active opposition of a number of persons to the execution of a law in a city or state. It is equivalent to sedition, except that sedition expresses a less extensive rising of citizens. It differs from rebellion, for the latter expresses a revolt or an attempt to overthrow the government to establish a different one or to place the country under another jurisdiction. It differs from mutiny as it respects the civil or political government, whereas a mutiny is an open opposition to the law of the army or navy. Insurrection is, however, used with such latitude as to comprehend either sedition or rebellion. It seems only logical that the Insurrection Act must deal with a substantial uprising against either the civil or political authority. In other words, not just a few people, because that would be sedition. Also, it cannot be a rebellion unless there is an attempt to replace the government. Keep these facts in mind as they will become important later on. Now, the Insurrection Act is found in Title 10, Sections 251 through 255 of the United States Code. The Sections 254 and 255 are more administrative aspects of the law. Section 254 reads, quote, whenever the President considers it necessary to use the militia or the armed forces under this chapter, he shall by proclamation immediately order the insurgents to disperse and retire peaceably to their abodes within a limited time. Section 254 requires the President to immediately order the insurgents to disperse and go home. And Section 255, quote, for the purposes of this chapter, the term state includes Guam and the Virgin Islands. Section 255 merely includes the territories of Guam and the Virgin Islands when it's referring to states in this law. Now let's get to the meat of the act. Section 251, federal aid for state governments. Whenever there is an insurrection in any state against its government, the President may, upon the request of its legislature or of its governor if the legislature cannot be convened, call into federal service such of the militia of the other states in the number requested by that state, and use such of the armed forces as he considers necessary to suppress the insurrection. This is Congress making law to exercise the power delegated to the United States in Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, specifically the protection from domestic violence. Quote, the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion and, on application of the legislature or of the executive when the legislature cannot be convened, against domestic violence. The United States is required to guarantee each state has a republican form of government. A republic is, quote, A commonwealth, a state in which the exercise of sovereign power is lodged in the representatives elected by the people. In modern usage, it differs from a democracy or democratic state in which the people exercise the powers of sovereignty in person. Article 4, Section 4 also requires that the United States protect each of the states against invasion and domestic violence only when the state asks for it. Generally, it would be the state's legislature who applies to the United States for assistance. If the legislature cannot be convened, then the state's governor can apply. Although there were many calls for the president to send in the militia during the riots this summer, no state requested the United States do so. Therefore, the president did not have legal authority to under Section 251. However, there's another problem. Article 4, Section 4 only authorizes the United States to protect the state from invasion or domestic violence, not insurrection. Nowhere does the Constitution grant the federal government the authority to protect the state against an insurrection. While most of us probably think an insurrection would include domestic violence, that is not necessarily the case. Since the Constitution does not delegate this power to the United States, nor does it prohibit it to the states, this power remains with the states. From the 10th Amendment, quote, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people." So when Congress wrote and passed Section 251 and then President Eisenhower signed it, they violated the Constitution. A little more about this later. Now, Section 252 is the use of militia and armed forces to enforce federal authority. Quote, "Whenever the President considers that unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages or rebellion against the authority of the United States make it impracticable to enforce the laws of the United States in any state by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, he may call into federal service such of the militia of any state and use such of the armed forces as he considers necessary to enforce those laws or to suppress the rebellion." There were times during the riots that the president sent in federal law enforcement to protect federal buildings. Now, if the president deemed it necessary, he could have used the militia and the armed forces to protect those properties and enforce federal law under Section 252. Some of you may be arguing that this would be a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act, which reads, quote, "Whoever, except in cases and under circumstances expressly authorized by the Constitution or acts of Congress, willfully uses any part of the Army or Air Force as a posse comitatus or otherwise to execute the laws shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 2 years or both." If the president had used the Army or Air Force to enforce the laws of the United States, if it was done under the Insurrection Act, that is an act of Congress and therefore legal. It would not violate posse comitatus. Now, Section 253 is the interference with state and federal law. Quote, "The president, by using the militia or the armed forces or both, or by any other means, shall take such measures as he considers necessary to suppress in a state any insurrection, domestic violence, unlawful combination, or conspiracy if it, 1, so hinders the execution of the laws of that state and the United States within the state, that any part or class of its people is deprived of a right, privilege, immunity, or protection named in the Constitution and secured by law, and the constituted authorities of the state are unable, fail, or refuse to protect that right, privilege, or immunity, or to give that protection, or 2, opposes or obstructs the execution of the laws of the United States or impedes the courts of justice under those laws. In any situation covered by Clause 1, the state shall be considered to have denied the equal protection of the laws secured by the Constitution." As we've already seen, the Constitution only authorizes the United States to protect the states against invasion or domestic violence when asked by the state. And since the president is tasked with enforcing the laws of the United States, we recognize that Congress legally established when the president could use the militia and armed forces to do so. We've also seen Congress illegally expand the powers of the United States to protect the states against insurrection in Section 251. Now, whereas in Section 251, the president had the power to assist the states only if they asked for it, now Congress wants him to be able to send in armed forces based solely on him deeming it necessary. This not only exceeds the powers delegated to the United States by the Constitution, but tramples its duty under Article 4, Section 4 to ensure that each state has a republican form of government. How can sovereign power be lodged in representatives the people have elected if an outside entity has the legal authority to step in and overrule them? Now, that's not all. Notice Clause 1 in Section 253 claims to give the President the authority to step in not only if federal laws cannot be enforced, but state laws as well if those laws protect rights named in the Constitution. It's one thing to use the armed forces of the United States to enforce federal laws, including the Constitution. But to authorize the President to unilaterally invade a state against their will, well, that's another thing altogether. Even if the pretext is that state laws to protect constitutionally protected rights are not being enforced, there is no language in the Constitution that delegates that type of power to the United States. I understand the desire to do something when people's rights are not being protected, but it's not the role of the federal government to control the governments in our states. That's our job. It seems easier to get someone else to do the hard work of controlling our employees in state government, but hiring a bully to do what we are unwilling to do is not only cowardly, but dangerous. The bully that is strong enough to get others to do what you want is strong enough to force you to do what others want. When the states ratified the Constitution, they created the government of the United States. By expecting the government of the United States to lord power over them, we invert the Union that was created in 1787. Now, you may have noticed that several times in this article, I made a distinction between insurrection and domestic violence. The reason is not only simple, but extremely important if we are to remain a free republic of states. Let me show you Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution of the State of Tennessee. Quote, that all power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their peace, safety, and happiness. For the advancement of those ends, they have at all times an unalienable and indivisible right to alter, reform, or abolish the government in such manner as they may think proper. While not every state includes similar language in their constitutions, I believe most of them do. They state that all power is inherent in the people, not in their government, and certainly not in the government of the United States. They also protect the right of the people to alter or abolish their government and replace it with another. The people have an unalienable right to rise up against their civil or political authority, to abolish their government, and to establish a new one as they see fit. In other words, the constitutions of most of our states protect the right to a peaceful insurrection. This is a right our founding fathers not only recognized, but exercised when they declared independence from Great Britain. Quote, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on the principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Sadly, this is a right our employees in Washington, D.C. have forgotten. I applaud any law that protects the rights of the people, but not at the expense of other rights or our right to live in a free and sovereign state. Even worse, what would happen should the President ever enact Section 253 of the Insurrection Act? This would, in effect, be an act of civil war against the states, a breaking of the compact that is the Constitution. It would be the final act of the destruction of the republic I have been warning about for quite some time. The question is, will the people keep their elected employees in check to prevent such an action or not? Will we fight the war against tyranny while we can still do so peacefully? Or are we waiting until the fight must be done with arms on the battlefield? I know, we saw what happened this summer in many of our cities and some of our states, and we want to do something. And, you know, the federal government, they're a big bully. They're a big force. And we've been trained that the federal government oversees the states, but that's not what was created. That's an inversion. That's a perversion of the Union that was created in 1787. If our states will not fulfill their duty, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. It is not the right of the federal government to step in and decide what isn't good. It is the right of the people to elect representatives that reflect how they want their sovereign power exercised, not the federal government to determine what is and isn't acceptable. More and more, we are looking to the federal government to bully our states to do what we should be doing for ourselves. Now, if states like California, Washington, Michigan, if they want to be lawless states, if they want their elected officials, if they want their law enforcement to ignore the laws that they've written, to ignore the rights, that's their problem to fix. Now, when those entities violate the Constitution of the United States, well, then the federal government has the authority to come in and charge them with federal crime. But that's enforcing federal law, not state law. That's the point that I want to bring across. In fact, there are two really important points. One, the Constitution does not delegate to the United States the power to suppress insurrection, only invasion and domestic violence. And two, the Constitution does not delegate to the United States the power to enforce state law. But yet, back in the 1950s, we once again see the federal government stepping in where it does not belong because some people don't like the way certain states are acting. This is just another example of America being turned into a tyrannical state, where the states don't matter. They can be overruled by the federal government, their own creation. It's like Frankenstein's monster going haywire. Frankenstein created the monster, and then the monster turned on him. Well, the states created the federal government, and the federal government has turned on it. I know, I have compassion for those people that are suffering from the actions of their employees, people that they elected or stood by and watched to be elected or didn't work to make sure better people were elected. Ultimately, the people of those cities and those states made this choice, and they must learn to live with the consequences. Maybe if they'd actually been allowed to deal with the consequences, maybe they would learn from it and choose better people to exercise their sovereign power. But to get a big bully to enforce on them something they were unwilling to enforce on themselves is not the act of a land of the free. It's the act of a tyrant. And to put all that power into a single person, the President of the United States, is not a free republic. That is a kingdom. We fought a war to no longer live under a king. Why are we creating a new king and just giving him the title of president? So with all that, I hope you survive 2020 as best as possible. I hope and I pray that you have a much better 2021. I will ask you to head to the website, constitutionstudy.com. I will ask you to sign up for the newsletter to stay engaged. Like I said, I've been rebuilding a bunch of systems, and I'm expecting some really exciting announcements early in 2021, early in January if I can get the work done in time. Most of all, I hope this made you think a little bit more about the Insurrection Act and what other people are saying is and is not capable under the Insurrection Act, and whether even all of the Insurrection Act is constitutional and therefore legal. Now, if you found that useful, please share this message. Send it to friends, family. I am not on Facebook because as often as I tried to get back on Facebook, they keep locking me out. So if you want to spread this word on Facebook, please do. But I'm not there. I am on YouTube and Parler, but the best place to get information is right there at the website. So please head to constitutionstudy.com. Enjoy your New Year's Eve. Enjoy your New Year's Day. Please be safe. Please be happy. And I hope I will see you here next time on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand.